Yesterday, Senators Chuck Schumer, Cory Booker, and Ron Wyden announced new legislation that would decriminalize and tax marijuana at the federal level. And Schumer says this issue is near or at the top of the list for Senate Democrats, even with President Biden's extensive agenda. Right now, a majority of the U.S. has already legalized weed for either medical or recreational use. And one of those states is my home state of New Jersey, which legalized marijuana back in November. But some black people in New Jersey are concerned that they suffered disproportionately when weed was illegal and won't reap any of the benefits if it becomes legal nationally. MSNBC correspondent Trymaine Lee spoke to people on both sides of this debate for his podcast, Into America, which is streaming now wherever you get your podcasts. And Trymaine, has there been a real shift towards destigmatizing marijuana and weed, and really a new understanding developing about how legalization is essentially, at its core, a racial justice issue?
Thanks, as always, for having me, Zerlina. Certainly, there's been this push for many years from the ground up, from activists and organizers and people in the legal community who have always talked about legalization as a civil rights issue. People like my cousin, NJ Weedman, who was featured in the podcast, who have been saying for a long time that if you look at the use of marijuana, black people and white people, all people use it at relatively the same rates. When you think about how black people especially have been policed and incarcerated, they're 3.5 and 4.5 times as likely to be arrested and charged for marijuana offenses than white folks, that it's clear that this issue has been, it is really a civil rights issue. And now I think it's interesting to see folks coming around to this idea, not just from the business community, but certainly politicians.
It's so interesting how this shift has happened as more and more states continue to legalize weed and, starting to release people from their incarceration for nonviolent drug offenses. Do you think that doing so and doing so retroactively is necessary to getting on that path to getting to true racial equity?
Zerlina, you'd have to imagine that would need to be a piece of it. What kind of society would we live in where we have people locked in cages for something that people are making billions of dollars for, right? Selling that plant has meant decades and decades of loss of freedom for many people. Yet now we have states like Colorado, they've been in the game for so long now, billionaires, celebrities, actors, people getting in and getting a cut of this, getting rich, while black people are still serving time. And let's not get one thing twisted at all. In some of these states where it's legal, black people are still disproportionately being arrested for public consumption of this stuff. And so, it's a long road towards equity, but you have to imagine going back and making people as whole as possible will go a long way to equity. And that could mean, and maybe some would say should mean, going out and uncaging people who have been locked up for weed.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the federal legislation that was introduced this week, you think any chance to pass now that all of these states are moving in one direction? Like, nobody is going backwards. Everybody's going in the same direction.
Well, you have the general attitudes of people that are shifting, but also this is big, big business, right? So you have a lot of states who say we have the space. Clearly, there's a market, legal or illegal. There's a big market for recreational marijuana. So I think that if ever there were a time where we see some real robust federal action in not just decriminalizing, but legalizing marijuana, you'd have to imagine it's now. As you saw, you had that map up earlier. It's so green and only getting greener.
It's true. Well, we love to see it. Trymaine Lee, thank you so much for being here tonight, and please stay safe.